It always started the same way. A look, a tone, a question that wasn't really a question. Why did you do that? What did you mean by that? Are you hiding something from me? I pause, heart racing. I wasn't sure what I'd done this time. I'd retrace my steps. A casual word, a text message, the way I laughed at something on TV. Somehow it was always wrong. Somehow I was always guilty. The walls would start closing in the moment their voice sharpened. I tried to reason, to explain, to clarify, but they weren't listening. They never were. Their questions were just traps laid out like tripwires. No answer was ever the right one. I was speaking into a void that only echoed back accusations. I remember one night vividly. I come home late, maybe 15 minutes past what I said. There had been traffic. A missed call. I walked in and their eyes were already loaded like a gun. Where were you? Who were you with? You always do this. The air was so heavy I could barely breathe. My voice trembled as I tried to explain, but my words twisted midair, reshaped by their doubt. I wasn't speaking English anymore, not to them. I was speaking guilt, and guilt was fluent in their world. Then came the silence, but not mine. There's the kind that screamed louder than words, the kind that punished me for not reading their mind. Later, there'd be an apology, a soft touch, a whispered, "I just love you too much," and I'd believe it, because I needed to, because otherwise I'd have to admit I was losing myself. Every day felt like a courtroom. They were the judge, the jury, the prosecutor. I was always the defendant, showing up with facts, receipts, context, only to be told, that's not what I felt happened. It didn't matter what I did, only what they decided it meant. And so I stopped sleeping well. I'd wake up mid-dream, heart racing, playing back yesterday's conversation. What did I say wrong? What did I miss? The noise never stopped, even when they weren't speaking, even when I was alone. It was in my head now, their voice, their doubts, their lens. I stopped trusting my own memory, stopped finishing my own sentences. I'd begin to say something and then stop halfway through, afraid of how they might spin it. The worst part? I started thinking maybe it was me. Maybe I was too much, too sensitive, too defensive. They said it enough times. I started saying it too, until one night, I sat in the kitchen, hands around a mug of tea I couldn't taste, and I felt the most deafening thing I'd ever felt. Silence. Not from them, from me. I couldn't argue anymore, couldn't explain, couldn't defend. There was nothing left to say, because I realized they didn't want understanding. They wanted surrender, and I was done offering myself up for sacrifice. The silence didn't feel like quitting, felt like oxygen. For the first time in what felt like years, I could breathe. It happened in the middle of a sentence. There's not mine. A sentence meant to provoke, to unravel, to bait me into proving, defending, unraveling. I heard the words, but they landed like dull echoes. Something about how I always twist things, how I never take responsibility, how I make everything about me. But instead of reaching for the usual tools, logic, memory, calm explanations, I felt my arms go still in my lap. My chest rose, then fell but didn't tense. My lips parted and then closed again. No reply. The room was still, but something massive shifted inside me, like tectonic plates finally grinding to a halt. No earthquake, just silence. They kept talking, pacing, but their voice had become background noise, like traffic far away. And my body, it felt like it weighed twice as much. Not from exhaustion, but release. Like I had been carrying sacks of invisible weight for years, and finally let them drop to the floor. I stared at the phone buzzing on the table, their name lighting up the screen like a flare in the dark. I didn't reach for it, not out of spite, not because I was angry, but because something inside me, something ancient, something sacred, whispered, "No more." And I listened. I remembered the times I didn't. Like that night in the parking lot, standing in the rain, arguing over nothing that felt like everything. How I raised my voice just to be heard. How I cried just to be believed. How I apologized for things I didn't do just to keep the peace. I remembered sitting on the edge of the bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to accusations that cut like glass. Still trying to explain. Still trying to fix it. Still chasing closure they had no intention of giving. I remembered losing hours, entire nights, trying to find the perfect words. That would unlock their understanding. That would make them see me clearly. That would convince them I was never the villain they kept inventing. But that day, I didn't chase. I didn't explain. I didn't try. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the living room floor, watching sunlight crawl across the rug, and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. Not numbness. Not disassociation. Not silence from defeat. But sacred, stubborn stillness. It was terrifying, honestly, to feel myself detach. To realize I was no longer trying to be chosen, validated, understood. I was choosing me. I closed my eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see their face. I didn't hear their voice. I heard mine. My breath. My thoughts. My truth. It didn't come with fireworks. There was no applause. Just me sitting in the quiet, holding the boundary I never knew I had permission to draw. And I knew it. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a pause. This was a door closing. From the inside. And I wasn't going back. At first, they smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach the eyes, too wide, too practiced. The kind of smile they used in public to charm waiters, disarm coworkers, win arguments they never admitted to starting. "Hey, babe," they said, voice drenched in artificial warmth, "you okay?" I didn't answer. Not out of malice. Just stillness. They tried again. A little louder. A little sweeter. Text messages with emojis they never used. Memes they never sent before. Photos of our past, a smiling, me leaning into them like I trusted the arms around me. Like I didn't know better. But this time I didn't lean in. I didn't reply. And that's when the cracks began to show. I watched as their eyes darted faster when I entered a room. They laughed louder, spoke with too much cheer. "Everything's good, right?" they'd ask with a smile so strained it looked painful. I didn't answer. Just nodded politely. And that silence, that polite, unshakable silence, it was louder than any scream I had ever given them. They tried small provocations. Left something undone they knew used to irritate me. Made offhand comments laced with bait, little hooks waiting to snag a reaction. "You've been so quiet lately. Not mad, are you?" I looked at them and blinked. No fire. No fight. Just observation. They didn't know what to do with that. The game wasn't fun if I didn't play. I saw it in the way their knee bounced during dinner. The way they stared too long at their phone, waiting for the dots that never came. The way they started answering their own questions out loud, like they were filling the silence with anything but truth. "Anyway, I guess you're just tired." "We're all tired." Smile. Chuckle. Sip. Their whole performance was unraveling. And I was the audience who refused to clap. But what struck me wasn't their panic. It was how familiar it looked. Because I used to wear that same mask. I used to paste on smiles that didn't belong to me. I used to fill silences with noise, anything to feel in control. And now I could see them doing the same, flailing beneath the surface of fake calm, trying to plug holes in a sinking ship with charm and emojis. I realized then, the silence terrified them. Not because it meant I was angry, but because it meant I was done. Because for once, they weren't the one choosing the narrative. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't correcting. There was no chaos to twist into their favor. Just me. Watching. Just them. Performing. And the stage was growing colder. I sat with that realization, not gleeful, not smug. Just free. I didn't need to prove anything. Didn't need to win the argument. Didn't need the last word. Because I already had what they couldn't manufacture. Peace. And no amount of smiles could hide their fear of it. They didn't miss me. They missed the hit. The fix of watching my face contort. confusion, panic, tears. The tremble in my voice when I tried to make sense of senseless accusations. The frantic energy I gave off when I tried to rescue something that only they were setting on fire. They weren't looking for love. They were looking for supply, emotion, tension, energy. Every fight we had was a ritual, not a disagreement but a performance. They'd throw the first spark, and I'd ignite. I remember one night, standing in the doorway, arms crossed, trying to explain why I hadn't seen their text. They'd stared at me blankly, arms folded, expression smug. "You always have an excuse," they said, like a surgeon slipping a scalpel into soft flesh. And I bled emotion, raised voice, shaky hands, apologies stacked on explanations stacked on guilt. They watched with fascination, as if my suffering validated their control. Because when I broke down, they stood taller. When I cried, they felt calm. When I scrambled to fix what they broke, they felt important. I was never their partner. I was their mirror, reflecting back the power they couldn't feel unless it came from someone else's pain. But now, the mirror was gone. No more flinching when they raised their voice. No more paragraphs sent at 2 a.m. explaining my intentions. No more standing in doorways hoping they'd understand. Now their words fell into a void. No echo, no resistance, no spark, just the sound of their own emptiness. And they hated it. It was like watching someone go through withdrawal. The pacing, the probing, the carefully dropped insults to bait a response. "You're really cold now. You've changed. Guess I never really mattered to you." It wasn't heartbreak. It was hunger. They were starving for my reaction, for the emotional chaos they once fed on like a feast. But I was done bleeding for their appetite. They had gorged on my empathy for years, drank from my wells of patience, grace, and second chances. But those wells were dry now, and all that remained was stillness. To them it felt like punishment, but to me it was peace. And peace was the one thing they could never control. They lost access not just to me, but to the power they siphoned from my pain. Because every narcissist needs an echo to feel real. And mine was gone. It always escalates before it ends. First came the guilt. "You've changed," they said, voice low, eyes soft, rehearsed. "I miss who you used to be." They leaned in like I was supposed to feel something. But I didn't. Not anger, not pain, just clarity. Then came the pity. "I've been going through a lot lately. My anxiety's been so bad. I just need you to understand me." As if the years I spent understanding, absorbing, and forgiving were erased overnight. As if I owed them one more chance, just because they said the right combination of wounds and words. When I didn't fold, they snapped. "You're heartless. This is emotional abuse. I don't even know who you are anymore." Funny, that last one almost made me smile, because I finally did. They paced the room like a trapped animal. Not because they were hurt, but because they were losing control. Control they once held with a glance, a sigh, a well-timed silence. But I wasn't playing anymore. There was no fuel in me for their fire, no spark to ignite their drama, and it drove them mad. The conversation shifted like whiplash. First the tears, then the flattery. "You're the only one who ever saw the real me. I'll change, I swear. Just don't give up on us." Then the threats. "You'll regret this. No one else will love you the way I did." But every word they said was a scream echoing in an empty hall. I was still, not silent out of fear or strategy, but because the part of me that once needed their approval was gone. Dead. They looked at me, searching for the old version, the one who would have folded by now, the one who would have cried, apologized, clung. But I didn't. because this time I saw it all clearly. The script, the cycle, the addiction to control. And I wasn't in it anymore. I didn't scream, didn't argue, didn't explain. I just stood up, walked to the kitchen table, picked up my phone, and read their last message. A long paragraph full of manipulation, half-truths, and self-pity. I held my thumb over the screen. Then, with one breath, deleted it. No reply, no goodbye, no explanation. Just delete. It wasn't revenge. It was release. It wasn't about punishing them. It was about finally choosing me. And in that moment, something irreversible happened. Not in them, but in me. Because the turning point wasn't when they changed. It was when I stopped needing them to. They moved fast because they had to. A new partner appeared within weeks. Photos surfaced online like digital confetti. Smiling faces, clasped hands, hollow captions. Finally happy. Real love wins. Grateful for second chances. It was a performance. All of it. And I knew the script too well. Oversharing became their new lifeline. Late-night stories filled with vague messages. Posts curated for pity, likes, applause. But no matter how many hearts they collected, none of it touched the hollow space I had once filled. The space where someone had listened, stayed, endured. Because love, real love, leaves fingerprints that false affection can't erase. I watched from a distance, not with bitterness, not with longing, but with something quieter, clarity. Their new supply smiled the way I once did. Eyes too wide, words too hopeful, trying to believe the fairy tale while standing on the ashes of mine. But masks don't breathe, and eventually even charm begins to rot. You could see it in the way their jokes fell flat, in the forced laughter, the way their smile lingered just a second too long, like glue trying to hold a cracking mirror. Behind the scenes, they unraveled, not with fireworks, but with erosion. Tiny fragments breaking beneath the surface. Sleepless nights, missed calls, eyes that no longer sparkled in their selfies. Because no matter how many people clapped for the show, they couldn't recreate what we had. Not because I was perfect, but because I was real. And once you've tasted love that doesn't manipulate, that doesn't demand or drain, you can't forget it. They thought they replaced me, but what they really did was replace the mirror. And this one, it didn't reflect adoration. It reflected them, all of them, the lies, the performances, the cracks they tried so hard to cover. Because when you build your identity on control, the loss of it isn't just painful, it's annihilation. They weren't mourning me. They were mourning the version of themselves they could only access through my light. And now, in its absence, everything felt dim. I didn't reach out, didn't gloat, didn't warn the next person. Because I'd learned, it's not my job to rescue someone from the collapse they orchestrated. It's not my role to explain what love is to someone who only ever used it as a tool. So I watched from a safe distance as the applause faded and the mask slipped, and all that remained was the silence I left behind, now screaming back at them from every empty room. Came on a Tuesday, late afternoon, gray skies, no special occasion, just the kind of day when shadows feel heavier and nostalgia becomes a weapon. A simple message lit up my screen. Hey, just thinking about you. No context, no apology, just familiar words, polished with faux softness. The kind of bait I used to bite. And for a flicker, a second, I felt it. Not hope, memory. The ghost of the old me stirred. The one who used to read messages like this and believe them. The one who used to think, maybe this time it's real. I remembered how I'd read his words over and over, looking for hidden meaning, proof of change, signs of remorse. But this time, there was only stillness inside me. No racing heart, no trembling fingers, no imaginary future built on crumbs. I set the phone down, unread, because that's what it deserved. He wasn't reaching for me. He was reaching for access, testing the door he used to walk through without knocking. But I had changed the locks. Hell, I burned the whole damn house. I stared at the screen for a moment longer. Not out of temptation, but examination. The timing was calculated. He always knew when my silence had lasted long enough to make him uncomfortable. And he always came back, not with accountability, but with hooks disguised as softness. Hope you're okay. Translation. Are you still broken enough to miss me? Remember when? Translation. Can I borrow your empathy one more time? And I almost laughed, because this wasn't a reunion. It was a recon mission. He wanted to know if the version of me he once controlled was still alive. She wasn't. The debate was brief. Should I respond? Should I ignore him? Should I send one cutting sentence to remind him I'm not the same? But even that felt too generous. He didn't deserve my fury, or my grace, or even my indifference. He deserved nothing. So I let the message sit, unread, unacknowledged. Not out of pettiness, but power. Because silence, when chosen, becomes sacred. It becomes armor. And in that silence, I wasn't waiting. I wasn't hurting. I wasn't playing dead. I was thriving. He tried the same door. He knocked with the same charm. But he didn't realize, I don't live there anymore. They always needed noise, attention, chaos, conflict, anything to drown out the silence inside them. But when I walked away and stayed away, that noise disappeared. And what was left behind terrified them. At first, they tried to replace me. Louder laughs, new lovers, bigger lies. But none of it worked. Because I wasn't the sound they missed. I was the mirror. And without me, they had to face themselves. That's when the spiral began. Not publicly, they still wore the mask in daylight. The smiling photos, the shallow charm. But behind closed doors, the collapse had already started. You could feel it in the static silence around them, like walking into a cold room that used to hold warmth. I didn't see it firsthand, but I didn't need to. I felt it in the digital quiet, in the sudden absence of curated posts, in the way their stories vanished without fanfare. They were unraveling, not all at once, but piece by piece. Insomnia, substances, overspending, angry messages they never sent, deleted accounts, reappearing with new ones, desperate to rewrite the story, desperate to outrun the shame, because for the first time they were alone, truly alone, not physically, spiritually. There was no one to reflect their false identity back at them, no one to blame, manipulate, or bend. And without that control, they weren't powerful. They were hollow. I remembered the version of me that once tried to save them. The girl who saw the broken pieces and believed her love could glue them back together. Who stayed through storms, hoping her light would be enough to lead them home. But it never was, because they weren't lost. They were hiding. And now there was nowhere left to hide. I pictured them pacing a dark apartment, TV flickering, phone in hand, scrolling for validation, attention, noise, anything to remind them they still existed. But the messages didn't hit the same. The calls went unanswered. The new supply couldn't match the old fuel. And when the chaos outside finally stilled, all they had left was the silence they used to weaponize. A mirror with no one looking back. That's the curse of building a self on shadows. Eventually, the light exposes the cracks, and there's no one left to hold the mask. They weren't just alone. They were haunted by the echo of my silence, by the weight of their choices, by the version of themselves they could no longer outrun. I didn't watch it unfold like a movie. I felt it like a cold breeze through a window I forgot I'd ever closed. And for once, I didn't feel responsible. I didn't feel sad, because this wasn't my destruction. It was theirs, by their own hand, by their own denial, by the very silence they once demanded, now turned inward like a blade. I didn't need revenge. I needed rest, and silence gave it to me not as a weapon, but as a sanctuary. While they mistook my stillness for bitterness, I was rebuilding. While they waited for the storm, I was planting a garden. They thought I was frozen, but I was blooming, quietly, steadily, beautifully. For the first time in years, my thoughts weren't loud. My heart wasn't heavy. My skin didn't flinch at the sound of a message alert. I didn't wake up preparing for battle. I woke up free. There were no dramatic epiphanies, no fireworks. Just small, sacred moments. Drinking my coffee while it was still warm. Laughing at something and knowing it was real. Speaking without fear of being twisted. Peace became my default, not my prize. And it didn't need to perform to be valid. I didn't crave attention. I cherished invisibility. Not as escape, but as return. Because for so long I lived in survival. Explaining, defending, absorbing. Trying to make sense of nonsense. Trying to earn love that should have been offered freely. But now, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Least of all to someone who thrived off my confusion. I found clarity not in closure, but in separation. From their chaos. From their narrative. From the version of me that tolerated both. And sometimes I think about her, the woman I used to be, the one who thought love meant proving yourself, the one who bent until she splintered, the one who cried into pillows and then apologized for making things complicated. I want to hold her, tell her she was never weak. She was hopeful. She was loyal in the face of manipulation. But now she's me, stronger, quieter, wiser. I walk differently. I speak slower. I choose stillness over spectacle. And when people ask what happened, why I left, why I changed, I just smile. Because there's no story that could capture the freedom of this silence. No sentence that could explain how it feels to finally be untouchable. They lost a person they never truly knew. But I found someone I never thought I'd get to be. And she is everything I once prayed to become. There was no announcement. No dramatic curtain drop. No final scene with tears and music swelling in the background. Just me, sitting by the window, a cup of tea warming my hands, and the kind of stillness that only comes after surviving a storm no one saw. It was raining lightly, the soft kind. The kind that doesn't rush you. The kind that feels like forgiveness. And I realized I didn't need anything from them anymore. Not the apology they'd never mean. Not the recognition they'd never offer. Not the closure they dangle like bait. I had created something better. Wholeness. Not perfect, not loud, not showy, but real. They will never understand what they lost. Because they never truly saw me. They saw what they could use. What they could twist, manipulate, dim. But they never saw the quiet power. The depth. The light. And now they never will. There's a victory in that, not one you post about, not one you parade, but the kind that lives in your breath, your choices, your boundaries. Victory is waking up and not needing to check your phone in dread. Victory is no longer rehearsing your words to avoid a fight. Victory is walking down the street and realizing no one owns your peace. I used to think winning meant proving them wrong, but now I know. Winning means being free and never needing them to know it. They won't get a final chapter. No explanation. No scene. Because this story outgrew them. And that's the beauty of it. My life continued. It bloomed. It expanded. It softened in places they tried to harden. And as I stood to wash out the last sip of tea, I smiled. Not because I remembered them, but because I didn't need to. There was no bitterness in me, no hate, no hunger for their ruin, only peace, quiet, steady, unshakable. And when I turned off the light in that room, the room where I once begged to be heard, I didn't look back. No speech, no final thought, no lingering shadow, just a hand on the doorknob, a deep breath, and a silent goodbye. The door closed, and with it, so did that chapter. Forever.